She screamed not from pain, but from horror. At the moment when the midwife saw between her legs not a child, but a writhing crimson creature with claws instead of fingers. Blind, slimy, and already squealing like a human, it fell onto the stone slabs of the confessional, covered with wax stains and bloody traces of old beatings. Before anyone could tell if it was alive or dead, the nun stumbled away, leaving the woman bleeding under the carved oak ceiling. 7 minutes later, the door was torn open and people in black robes rushed in. They didn't say a word. The woman was dragged out on a half-lowered pall, and the creature was wrapped in a sack, bearing the seal of the diocesan court. The building was sealed until nightfall. By morning, Mass was already being celebrated in the cathedral, but the smell of iron and milk still lingered in the corners, despite the incense. Later, in the notes of the overseer of the order's chamber, it was noted. The servant girl, brought in for public announcement by order of Inquisitor F. Lorenzo, claimed that the fetus began to speak in the 3rd month. It recited prayers that no one had taught it. This line was crossed out with a thick stroke of ink. The woman's name was known: Teresa del Campo, 23 years old, widow of a scribe. Originally from Cordoba, she entered the service of the Monastery of the Holy Blood as a laundress. According to testimony, she was distinguished by excessive friendliness towards young servants, a tendency to late prayers, and reading non-canonical texts. 2 letters found in her room contained excerpts from the banned Collection of Visions of St. Andrew, which mentions conception by a spirit without flesh. Inquisitor F. Lorenzo, who at the time of the events had suffered a series of attacks of renal colic and partial gangrene of his right foot, immediately issued an order for the arrest of all female servants. According to the records of the court physician, he himself was already suffering from alternating bouts of weakness, fever, and dark visions in which a baby with mouths on its stomach appeared to him. Modern researchers attribute these symptoms to poisoning with lead tincture and regular intake of hallucinogenic herbs in the form of candles. The birth took place 16 weeks after the disappearance of the novice Alonso. His name is mentioned in the diaries of the investigating brothers. Pale, kept to himself, often spent the night in the laundry room. He himself was not found. But 2 days after the birth, his tongue dried out, and with the word Eva carved into the root, was left at the gate of the tribunal, wrapped in a piece of monk's clothing. This piece is still kept in the archives of Seville. The woman was kept in a basement. The conditions were standard: a cramped stone cell, 2 buckets of water a week, 1 piece of bread a day, no bed. The guard testified, for the first 4 days, she was silent. Then she began to sing. Not church songs, but children's counting rhymes mixed with confessional formulas. On the 5th night, she howled. On the 6th, she asked for her child to be returned. On the 7th, she said that he was coming back. The Inquisitor did not interrogate her personally. His condition worsened. The tissue decay spread from her foot to her groin. According to medical notes, the lesions were accompanied by pus and a blackish mass with a sour smell. Vinegar compresses, clove decoction, and ammonia powder were used to relieve the pain. The bouts of delirium became more frequent. He said he heard a voice from his pelvis, that the flesh in his leg was whispering sentences to him. In the 4th week after giving birth, the woman was taken from her cell and led to the Black Hall. The trial was held without witnesses. She did not scream. There was a bag on her head, through which urine dripped. According to the report on the order of the ceremony, drawn up by Notary Tiero, the following was presented at the Inquisition hearing: a scroll with a recording of the baby's voice, written from memory by a servant, destroyed on the same day. A piece of skin growing on the baby's back, resembling the shape of a cross with curved ends, disappeared without a trace. The testimony of the nun who delivered the baby, who later admitted that his eyes were human, but they had no eyelids and the pupils moved all the time. The trial itself lasted less than 2 hours. The verdict was announced at noon. The woman was convicted of being the bearer of an unclean conception and was to be burned along with her fetus, whose body was kept in a barrel of vinegar in the basement of the archive. On the same day, an order was issued for the immediate preparation of a pyre. According to the supervisor's notes, at the moment the sentence was pronounced, the inquisitor's body began to ooze grey pus, even without movement. He was carried away on a stretcher. He insisted on being present at the execution. The pronouncement of the sentence was accompanied by the closure of the monastery for 3 days and the recall of all diplomatic missions from the neighboring district. A letter was sent to the Archbishop of Toledo, emphasizing the need for silence on the nature of what had happened, in the name of preserving order and piety. The execution was set for dawn. Teresa was carried, tied to a board, in a semi-conscious state. Her skin in the groin was cracked, as if she was still in labor. The fetus, according to the Inquisitor's orders, was placed on the mother's stomach and tied to her body with ropes. No witnesses were allowed. Only soldiers and 2 priests, one of whom was blind. The testimony has been preserved. She lay like a tree. Her mouth was open, her tongue black. The baby was no longer screaming, but gurgling. The fire did not catch for a long time, going out 3 times on its own. The Inquisitor whispered prayers and spat into the ashes. Only after one of the soldiers shouted the name of the fallen did the flames rise, and they did not go out. On the 3rd day, after Marie de Croix's arrest, her face was covered with abrasions from ropes, her hair was cut to the skin, and the bones of her fingers were swollen from excessive tightening with iron rings. She did not utter a word. Master Barthélemy, a theologian and senior interrogator at the convent of St. Mary of Mercy, ordered her to be transferred to the lower cells. Neither fellow believers nor guards were allowed to go there without orders. The walls were warm from the earth, and the air was heavy with the smell of urine, fat, and smoked blood. Her eyes showed not fear, but concentration, as if everything that was happening had already happened to her once before. The interrogation continued 4 times a day. Measures permitted by Clement's bull were used, pulling her up with ropes, squeezing her breasts with boards, fumigating her with sulfur, and pouring boiling water on her while she was fasting. According to the testimony of 2 monks, her body did not bleed, even when the skin on her feet was cut and her nails were torn off. She looked into the face of her executioner without begging. Only on the 6th day, when a junior cleric was allowed into the cell with a prayer book, did Marie whisper, "I saw his eyes. They were not human." According to the archdeacon's testimony, something did indeed happen in the monastery church on the night Marie was arrested. The candles on the altar darkened. 2 psalm singers lost consciousness, and their eyes remained open until dawn. No one could explain why sticky dark pus, resembling honey mixed with blood, was oozing from under the confessional. This residue was collected in a glass jar and handed over to Cardinal Valmont, who ordered that no one should disclose this But in the treatises of the Benedictine monks for that year, there was a mention, a sign of impurity, as if a sore had opened in the very heart of the altar. Meanwhile, Marie's body began to decompose while she was still alive. Her stomach swelled. Even though she was not given any food, black foam came out of her mouth and brown spots appeared on her skin, especially on her chest and stomach. Her legs lost sensation, and she asked to be left standing so that she would not feel the weight of her own body. Father Lambert, one of the few who kept records, wrote, "She began to smell like a dead person, although she was breathing evenly. Her room seemed to be suffocating, and flies, out of nowhere, swarmed around her. Meanwhile, in the chambers of the Inquisitor de Montagne, a feverish exchange of letters began. Rumors of the incident spread beyond the diocese. Observers arrived from Arras, Rouen, and even from the Angers Cathedral chapter. They did not demand a trial. They demanded an autopsy, a genuine post-mortem autopsy. If a demon was growing inside the woman's body, as written in treatises on flesh marks and maternal brands, it could be extracted and exposed. Marie refused water, bread, and confession. She did not look at the crucifix. Her tongue turned black and swelled, and her eyes began to blind from pus. The doctor, who had been secretly summoned by the archdeacon, noted in his report, "Brain fermentation has begun. Corpse spots are creeping through the veins. But the heart is not giving up. This is no longer a human body." On the 12th day, by order of the cardinal, she was carried on a stretcher to the back chapel. There, preparations were made for the exorcism. The clergyman put on black gloves soaked in vinegar. The candles were extinguished by the wind, even though there were no windows. De Montagne was the last to enter. He demanded silence. At his command, the woman's abdomen was cut open. A heavy, acrid vapor escaped from the wound. One of the brothers screamed. A bloody lump fell out of her womb, something that resembled a baby but was covered in slime, with no eyes and a mouth full of small, sharp teeth. It wasn't breathing, but its mouth moved as if it were praying. The event was classified. All witnesses gave written oaths of silence, but brothers began to leave the monastery. 2 disappeared, 1 hanged himself in the bell tower. The archives report. After the day of the autopsy, the entire southern chapel turned black 3 times, and the walls dripped with sweat. Marie never spoke again. She died on the 16th day, her eyes open, from which 2 white flies crawled out. The smell of burning did not dissipate from the stone walls of the monastery, even though more than 3 weeks had passed since the ashes of the witch and the flesh of the baby had been scattered over the courtyard. The priests continued to serve the liturgy with faces distorted by pallor and tension, while the senior brother archivist wrote long notes to Rome at night, claiming that an infected silence hovers between the walls like a threat that has not been burned away. The infant's body did not simply burn slowly. It did not smoke like ordinary flesh. According to a witness, Brother Ladomir, the fire would catch, but then retreat, as if licked by a shadow. The ministers brought to the pyre could not look. Many uttered prayers through clenched teeth. Others' hands shook as they crossed themselves again and again until their foreheads were covered with abrasions. The Inquisitor Sebastian himself, who watched the execution from the balcony, did not appear in public for more than 9 days afterwards. According to his personal physician, he suffered from nausea, bloody diarrhea, and insomnia, accompanied by moans and cries about a baby with a translucent skull and pupils looking inward. Traces remained in the basement of the monastery where the woman was held before her execution. Not only blood and vomit, those were to be expected, but on the cold slab where she gave birth, there were dried, dark spots in which maggots began to appear after a day. According to the night watchman, the walls whispered Latin prayers that we had not learned, but which sounded correct. This was recorded in the night watchman's log and added to the investigation file. But on the orders of Bishop von Brettel, it was subsequently blacked out and burned. While the monks remained silent, envoys began to arrive at the monastery. From the Order of Justice, from episcopal consistories, from universities. One of them, Master Hans Mell, a physician and theologian, stayed in the monastery for 2 days, examined the remains, made notes, but was then found in his room with his jaw torn apart, as if he had tried to tear out his tongue. Written in blood on the wall were the words, "She knew." This was the last straw. Rumors spread throughout the monastery that the woman should not be executed, but imprisoned, and her child given to isolated nursing, as was practiced with wild babies in the royal hospital at the Paris court. Meanwhile, the papal curia was divided. Some considered everything that had happened to be a manifestation of collective obsession, others a warning. Cardinal Sanleone issued an urgent order. The exhumation of the remains, the examination of the ashes, and the closure of the monastery for a quarantine period of at least 60 days. Inquisitor Sebastian tried to resist, claiming that everything had been cleansed and the danger eliminated, but on the 3rd day, after the arrival of the papal notaries, he began to faint and bleed from his ears. According to a monk who eavesdropped at the door of the cell, Sebastian did not pray by heart, as was customary, but in a broken voice, muttering other people's names, among which the female and male names Aleta and Dalmas were repeated. These names were not found later in the lists of women who had given birth or in the chronicles of the local parish. It was suggested that these were the names of his mother and grandfather, but the archives, questioned on behalf of the curia, confirmed that no such people had been born in the area. The entire monastery was plunged into seclusion. The kitchen was working at half capacity, and only the elderly worked on the farm. One novice was found hanged by the well with his fingernails torn out, another sitting in a corner with his eyes gouged out. He did not die, and later, according to Brother Levin, repeated the same thing. The baby laughed when his mother died. Old ointments did not help. The monks complained of strange rashes that could not be burned off. Bloodletting caused severe vomiting, and those who took opium began to have convulsions and blindness. A master hospitaller from Arles wrote in his report, "It is no longer the body that hurts, but the monastery itself." When one of the gravediggers opened the place where the ashes had been scattered and fell down dead, a handful of ashes was taken from his mouth. According to the priest, he should not have been there, but was called by a shadow. This was the last piece of evidence before the monastery was officially declared closed until purification. Inquisitor Sebastian died 8 days later of suffocation caused by a tumor on his tongue. His death was not mentioned in the chronicles, and his body, according to servants, was unrecognizable. By order of the cardinal, his body was not buried, but burned in the same place as the woman and her baby, despite all the canons. 3 months after the execution, the woman and her baby were declared not heretics, but infected chosen ones in a secret report by the Bishop of Würzburg. The document, intended only for internal circulation in the Curia, stated she was not a witch. She was a vessel, and the one who escaped was not her son. Underneath was a seal and a signature, later erased with a knife in the monastery archives. The cleansing of the monastery did not help. The monks who were allowed to return found that the walls were covered with a coating that could not be scraped off. When they tried to clean it, their hands began to bleed, and the skin on their fingers peeled off in layers. Latin inscriptions scratched into the floor. Slabs continued to reappear even after the slabs were replaced. One of the servants who carried water for the new consecration rites burned alive before the eyes of the deacon. According to him, the fire had no source. This was recorded in a report sent to the cathedral chancellery, but later declared a fabrication due to general hysteria. In Rome, debates began about closing monasteries along the entire northern border. Society was divided. Some demanded the complete eradication of heresy, while others called for an admission of error and forgiveness of sins. Cardinal Reno, one of the defenders of the moderate position, was found dead in his own cell. A piece of human bone was found stuck in his throat. An examination ordered by the Pope determined that the bone belonged to a baby. Rumors spread quickly. In nearby towns, mothers began throwing their newborns into wells, fearing contamination from the flesh that sought entry. One of the priests in Landsberg, who preached against the demon from the Confessional, was stoned to death by women who accused him of concealing the truth. His skull was never found. The bishop's report states, with his head, his cry was silenced. An archival commission, sent by the Curia, found a diary in the monastery, an old bound volume containing scattered pages with children's scribbles written in black liquid, resembling dried blood. Among the entries, the phrase, "He did not come out of her, he ate her from the inside," was repeated. According to Commissioner Bolt, this phrase was repeated by one of the new novices who had no access to the diary. By spring, most of the villagers at the foot of the hill had left their homes. The fields were not sown, the wells began to emit the smell of rotten meat, and spots in the shape of spreading circles resembling eye sockets appeared under the dome of the church. An order was given to reconsecrate the building, but the 3 priests who performed the ceremony died of an unknown inflammation of the mouth. The tissue was eaten away from the inside, and their tongues rotted away while they were still alive. Officially, the monastery was burned down on the day of the Transfiguration of the Lord. Witnesses claimed that at the moment when the southern wall collapsed, a woman's scream was heard from inside the hall. One of the monks, holding a crucifix in his hands, fell to his knees and said, "She gave birth again," and never spoke another word. The Episcopal Commission recognized the monastery as a place where truth is distorted by the flesh. The border on which it stood was later officially moved, and its location was marked on maps as a wasteland. No one has the right to build, live, or graze livestock there. The place was nicknamed the Silent Mouth. The last document in the archive is filed without a signature. It consists of a single sentence, written in dark ink. "If he entered once, he will enter again, through any one of us."